Moving into our next handout, the Genderbread Person. This diagram is to help us understand the complexity of sexuality and gender identity. This model is meant to accurately depict how these concepts show up in our society. It is not a depiction of what a dream society could look like. To begin, let's fill out the blanks and name the parts of the Genderbread Person.
On the first line, pointing to the brain, we can write identity. Gender identity is who we, in our heads, know ourselves to be based on what we understand to be the options for gender and how much we align or don't align with one of those options. Gender identity is our psychological sense of gender. On the line below that, pointing to the heart, we can write attraction. Attraction is the different ways we feel pulled to other people, often categorized based on our gender and the gender of those we feel drawn to. This categorization is referred to as sexual orientation. On the bottom line on the right, we'll write sex. Sex here referring to anatomical sex. Refers to the physical makeup of our bodies and specifically all the body parts we've named as sex characteristics, both the primary traits we're born with and the secondary that we might develop later in life. On the left, we have a line pointing to the entire diagram. On this line, we can write expression. Gender expression is all about the different ways we can present ourselves through our actions, our clothing, and our demeanor, and the gendered ways those presentations are socially interpreted. Does anyone have any questions about those terms or their definitions? Pause here to discuss. Let's now move on to the bottom half. Here you'll see some scales and blank spaces. These are not fancy arrows. You can think of each of these as one-way continuums or scales depending on how the different components above may show up for us. For some people, it's helpful to imagine a 0% on the left and a 100% on the right. Again, we're going to start by filling in the blanks. With gender identity, people often think of social roles, gender norms, and personality traits, and the expectations baked into these things. In the top blank, we can write woman, and in the bottom blank, we can write man. And we're going to add a ness to both of these, because these lines indicate all the varying degrees of potential womanness and or manness, which someone might identify with. Gender expression, people most often think of hairstyles, grooming, makeup, clothing, nonverbal mannerisms, and other things we see on the outside. We'll write femininity in the top line and masculinity in the bottom line, as these are the two words that people generally use to describe the different ways their expressions show up. And with anatomical sex. The first things that people think of are genitals and reproductive organs, but lots of things make up what we call sex, including body hair, hip to shoulder ratio, chromosomes, pitch of voice, and more. On the top line, we'll write femaleness, and on the bottom line, we'll write maleness, because here we are depicting the varying degrees someone might embody these traits, as opposed to the sex a person is assigned at birth, which is generally solely determined by external genitalia at birth. Does anyone have any questions about these scales or the words we're using to label them? Pause here to discuss. Now we're going to fill in the blanks in the attraction section. People experience attraction, or don't, in a lot of different ways. Two common ways people describe the attraction they may or may not be experiencing is as sexual and romantic. You can think of sexual attraction as the drive to engage in physically intimate behaviors like touching, kissing, or intercourse, and romantic attraction as the drive to engage in socially intimate behaviors like flirting, dating, and marriage. Some people experience both, some only one, and some neither. And within those experiences of attraction, we often focus on the gender of others that we are attracted to. In the top blank, you can write women, and in the bottom, we can write men. But we can also write all the words from above. That is, in the top line, we might write womanness, femininity, and or femaleness. And in the bottom line, manness, masculinity, and or maleness. Because our sexual or romantic attraction might be to a particular part of gender. For example, someone might be attracted to people who identify with a lot of womanness, but express a lot of masculinity. Does anyone have any questions about these scales or the words we're using to label them? Pause here to discuss. All right, let's see what Alicia has to say.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about you kind of putting together your own genderbread person, which you should have in handout form. But before we get going on that, I want to kind of explain some other concepts and exactly how to kind of fill out that form. So essentially, you want to think about gender as your overall being and who you are and how you express yourself and your identity. And that's really can be made up of your sex, your gender, and your sexual orientation. And all those things fall on a continuum. And then none of them are the same. They're all different. So like we said earlier, identity does not equal expression, does not equal sex, does not equal gender, and does not equal sexual orientation. So all of that falls on a different continuum. Some things that kind of help me simplify things, and this will be the first part of your genderbread second half of your worksheet, is you want to think about your womanness and your manness. So again, how on a continuum do you identify more as with man qualities, or do you identify more with woman-like qualities, or maybe you fall somewhere in between, and that's okay too. Again, once again, the continuum. For femininity and masculinity, how you express yourself. Again, you could maybe one day you feel a lot more feminine and you're somewhere on the 75% range in that area, and one day you're feeling more masculine and you have an 80% of masculinity that day. But a lot of us kind of fall more in a range that kind of might stay the same with that. And then we have maleness and femaleness, which is what you embody. So this is often related to biological sex, but it doesn't have to be, but it does typically relate more to your physical traits, which of course your sexual organs are sometimes in that category, but they don't always have to be. It can also be how you cut your hair and how you present and things like that as well. So again, your maleness and femaleness, people might think that's the most black and white aspect, but not always, because they're also, intersex people as well, and people have different chromosomes and all sorts of different things happen in nature. So that's also a continuum in how you see yourself. So now we'll take the genderbread person, that's all right, and you're gonna basically fill out the bottom part. So you're gonna kind of rank if you feel like you embrace more of your womanness or your manness, and mark down where you kind of fall on that continuum. And then go to the next one, femininity and masculinity. Do you feel like you embrace your masculinity more or your femininity more? Or maybe they're equal. Put the marks down on that. And you have your maleness and femaleness. Again, a lot of times that's going to relate more to your biological sex, but not always. So again, you can put down which one you feel like you embody more of a maleness or more of a femaleness. So I think the continuum, the whole spectrum, is really interesting and something people lose track of, because we live in such a black and white society, and we don't need to be black and white about things. That's what's great about gender identity.
To highlight this, we want to use the blank space between the gender and sexuality scales to write two things. Identity does not equal expression, does not equal sex. And gender does not equal sexual orientation. As we said at the beginning, the Genderbread is a model that shows us how complex gender and sexuality are in our current society, not the ideal world we would want to live in. Our hope is that understanding might lead to a healthier world, and we hope that this intro was a helpful step for you towards a better understanding of yourself and others. Whatever you write on your Genderbread person is for your eyes only. We won't be collecting these or asking you to share your answers. We're going to give you 2 minutes. We are socialized to oversimplify all of this and to think that once we know one thing about someone, we can fill in the rest of their blanks. Your 2 minutes starts now. Time's up. Let's take a break.